Okay, guys, part five of this series, what's going on with silver. Today, we're going to address this question of, what was silver's involvement in money in the United States? How and when did it become money? How did it relate to gold, to paper? And I'm going to briefly review a complicated period of history in the United States following the Civil War. The Union came out of the war in debt, and Lincoln and the Republicans wanted to expand the economy. They wanted to enable the build out of the railroads and expand the country in the westward direction. And their options were to borrow money from British banks at like 24 to 36% interest, and that was not an option. So what they decided to do is the brainchild of a guy named Carey, who was tutored under Benjamin Franklin. They issued this thing called the greenback, 400 million of them dollars issued. It was legal tender. You couldn't pay interest on debts with it because bondholders required payment in specie, gold in particular. You had to pay interest in gold. So you couldn't use these for that, but you could use it for all of the legal tender. It wasn't backed by anything. Unlike promissory notes, which banks issued, it wasn't backed by any bank. This is backed by the government. And it held up pretty well in value. It was used in commerce, but it touched off a big debate that went on for decades in the United States as to what would constitute money and what were the competitors. People wanted this because it expanded the money supply, particularly people out west that had trouble borrowing. There weren't a lot of banks. There wasn't a lot of money available. So if you were a railroad or farmer and you're trying to settle out west, it was tough getting a hold of money. Competition was gold, gold-backed paper. It was silver-backed paper. It was backed by banknotes. These were promissory notes that could be issued by any bank. If they had silver or gold in the vault, they could issue this promissory note, a piece of paper that said that if you presented this paper to the specific issuing bank, you were given physical silver, a dollar in silver, a dollar in gold, assuming they had the reserves. If you doubted they had reserves, this would result in a bank run or a banking panic. This is a big issue. Banks all over the United States were issuing these things. It could be 7,000 of them at one time issued, and they would be regional. So it was a little bit chaotic. You could use these as money if you and the people you wanted to use it with had trust in this bank that they actually had silver and gold and reserves. That was an issue. But they didn't always. A whole reserve system developed with the goldsmiths in London because they realized that not everybody comes back at once to ask for their gold or silver back. So we can issue a lot more paper in value than we actually have reserves in the vaults. And so bank runs and banking panics came in. And so for the decades following the war, what would be money? Would it be these notes? Would it be bonds? Would it be silver specie or silver coins? Would it be gold or gold-backed promissory notes? That was debated for decades. The greenback was an experiment in money. In the end, it was settled in favor of the banks, the Eastern Banking Syndicate, and the merchants who had to deal with the UK and with Europe in trading, who were all on a gold standard. Money was gold. That was the reference. Any paper that was issued was with respect to gold. And so they wanted that common reference point. But there were interest farmers, miners, railroads who didn't trust the banks, didn't want banks in control. It was a bit of a class warfare. The lower classes versus the elites and the banking, that was all a factor. Political factors came in play. So it was a very tumultuous period. There were people who argued for silver as money. They wanted silver coins to expand the money supply. They lost. Silver was shunted aside. They continued to print it, but it wasn't legal money. Gold was the standard. So there's no ratio like there was in ancient Rome or in medieval times, 12 to 1 or 16 to 1 weight value of silver with respect to a weight of gold. That all disappeared in 1879 when they finally resumed issuing gold and paper in the United States. Silver continued to be circulating, and we'll talk about that in later videos, but I just wanted to briefly review this complex history. If you want to read more about it, a guy named Unger wrote a book, very scholarly book called The Greenback Era, ERA, and very detailed, very technical, fascinating read, a little complicated to follow. I've given you a whirlwind tour of it here. If you want to know more, go read that book. He won the Pulitzer Prize for it, deservedly so. Okay, so whirlwind tour. In part 6, we'll talk about silver as money today, and I'll share some anecdotes about my exploration of where and how you can use silver today. Okay, so stay tuned for the rest of that series.